Bonjour virtuellement à Marseille. Today I'm going to introduce you to Roger Caillois' theory on war. Also, his first intellectual writings on these topics had already been published during the period of the Collège de Sociologie from the middle to the end of the 1930s. I will here only deal with his book Bellone ou La Pompe de la Guerre from 1963. This is due to the fact that it can be read as a synthesis of his former topics on the subject of war. He himself categorizes his writings as a description of the effects of passion and of the imagination in the manifold forms of collective life. My understanding of Caillois' work is influenced by a remark from Georges Bataille in L Erotisme, wherein he mentions that only Roger Caillois used the oral teaching and advices of Marcel Mauss about the socially organized aspects of violence, and thus had been the first to elaborate a theory of transgression. One could add that Mauss himself had surely been influenced by Emil Durkheim and Robert Herz. I suppose that it is possible to talk about a sociology of violence regarding the Durkheimians. To my knowledge, this subject has up to now only scarcely been investigated in a systematic way. Also, there are important hints in the publication Durkheim and Violence, edited by Romy Mukherjee in 2010. Under this scope, Caillois' work can be classified as a sociology of war, which is a part of a sociology of violence in general. Hans Joas, a German sociologist, also points out that Georges Bataille and Roger Caillois took up Mauss' conception of the relation between gift and destruction to formulate their own thoughts about violence and war. But he simply concludes, this interpretation collapsed because the later ethnological research could show that excess and destruction resulted from the specific living conditions of Native Americans under British colonial rule and were not inherent in the phenomenon of ceremonial gifting per se. Of course, it is necessary to compare theoretical assumptions with empirical evidence, but your statement is hardly valid, as I will demonstrate, because it fails to take into account that the theory of Caillois has got a broader intention. Before reconstructing Caillois' argument by a rereading of Bellone ou La Pompe de la Guerre, there is one last remark I have got to mention in order to avoid misunderstandings. Caillois' theory of war has frequently been interpreted as an apologetic of violence. If this applies to the early writings of Caillois, cannot be decided here. At least for Bellone, it can be demonstrated that Caillois was not glorifying war, as he concludes, it is time that the person concerned with it, so the war, deals with it and starts to understand where the evil dwells. Regarding the question how to find a remedy therefore, this is an endless and difficult enterprise. This implies to get to the basis of things, which for the human things means the education of the human being. I will first highlight the general structure and thesis of his book, and in a second part focus on Caillois' scheme of historical development. First, structure and thesis of the work. The book, which forms the subject of my talk, is organized in two parts. The first one is entitled The War and the Development of the State. The second one, The Vertigo of War. While the first part is an empirical study of the socio-historical development of war, the second one deals with the dimension of the experience of war under the specific condition of a certain social structure. It is important to highlight this point because Caillois supposes that not only the physiognomy of war is changing over time, but also the way war is socially experienced. Thus, when he speaks of the sacred character of war, he is in no way essentializing, but uses a method which could be labeled a genealogical phenomenology. The war, as he writes, is only sensed as sacred when it appears as fascinating and horrifying at the same time. As long as it is reduced to a form of military artwork, as long as it only includes a small number of professional soldiers who are guided by strategists who refer to a tradition which is conformed to a scholarly measurement and leads to only small losses, it, also the war, is only a competition with uncorked weapons. Although it is bloody, it appears like a kind of regulated action which is similar to a game or sport. In fact, it has been so for centuries, and under these conditions, the war did not provoke a feeling of a religious scale. To release the reflexes of the sacred, it is necessary that it is a total risk for a whole population. Concerning the difference between sacred phenomena, such as war and religion, Caillois clearly draws a distinction. It is nevertheless certain that they, so that the transgressions at war, are far from creating even the least explicit religion. The war does not provide space for any specific cult. It manifests a diffuse form of the sacred, which is felt anonymous. It has no dogmas, no temples, no priests, but also it does no less advocate the chill of horror and of ecstasy, and always a certain respectful fear. I'm not able to elucidate this difference here more clearly, but as I said, it is important to be aware that this analogy between religion and war is only valid under specific conditions which are related to the main argument of the book, which reappears frequently under different formulations, of whom I only want to mention two. First, when the subjects transform into citizens, war becomes the preoccupation of the nation and is no longer restricted to the government. In his introduction, dating from January 1962, he emphasizes that this is exactly his main thesis. Whether the social inequalities between men are codified and maintained through rights, customs, and laws, then the wars are generally limited in a courtly form and not really bloody, kinds of games and ceremonies. All humans possess the same rights, then they equally partake of public affairs, and the war in this case tends to transform into unlimited shocks which are deadly and implacable. If these assumptions are in every case empirically valid, is not the subject of my talk. It would of course be interesting to compare Caillois' assumptions with the findings of Yuval Harari about Renaissance military memories. One might also raise the question how the supposed continuity between democracy and totalitarianism generated by the threat of war is itself transformed due to the fact that the general's conscription has changed in democratic countries since Caillois had formulated his thesis. Under which form of his typological categories can contemporary wars be classified? Are we faced with primitive wars, wars in the context of the emergence of the state, imperial wars or courtly wars, or have we entered a completely new era of warfare which is not covered by the existing categories? So now I will talk about the scheme of the historical development. Also, the thesis of the sacred dimension of war at first sight only seems valid in the context of modern states, which social structure of equal rights, according to Caillois, first emerged with the French Revolution, it may be interesting to take a closer look at the conception of historical development implied in his argument. It may seem as if there emerged something exceptional with the French Revolution, which is the axial age idea of equal rights, corresponding to the equal obligation to defend the nation. Although this might be true, there were former developments in Switzerland, Sweden, and the Netherlands. In the context of a conference organized in cooperation with the Institut de Recherche Asiatique, it may be more interesting to focus on the sources used by Roger Caillois in the first part of his book. These concern the translation Art militaire des Chinois ou recueil d'anciens traités sur la guerre composés avant l'ère chrétienne par différents généraux chinois. It was published in 1772 by the Jesuit missionary Joseph Amyot. I am aware of the difficulties of sources, translations, and interpretations, but I have only scarce knowledge on China. I will take for granted what Caillois wrote. It is the task of the experts to judge if this is nonsense. Caillois sketches the principles of Chinese military morality as they were formulated by generals like Sun Tzu, Wu Tzu, and Sima in the period between 500 and 400 before Christ era. One striking characteristic can be seen in the advices that the final goal of war should not be the destruction of the enemy, but to try to avoid this act as much as possible by using other methods like psychological subjugation and spreading of dissension in the enemy's society. War seems to be generally perceived as a disease and peace as a healing. That Caillois does not take these advices as a kind of substance of Chinese mentality becomes clear when he points to the historical development in China, which he compares to the history of Europe and the transformation of feudal societies into national states. Quotation: departing at the end of the 17th century, there will be the production of a strange analogous development, like in China, right in the moment in which the decisive reforms led in a nearby identical way to substitute the hierarchy of feudal privileges for the power of the state and for the participation of the citizens at its administration. At the two extreme points of the world, in the distance of 2 millennia, there had been two symmetric revolutions which without doubt responded to the same requirements and which had certainly the same consequences. In both cases, it seems that the equality of newly accorded rights inaugurated an unknown and wild style of war. What fascinates me by this observation is that it states that war is not war itself. In addition, his conception of history is obviously not evolutionistic in a linear sense. History seems rather cyclical and equipped with bifurcations. Caillois correlates the physiognomy of war with the social, economic, and technical developments. Thereby, he tries to demonstrate that it is not natural for a society to use all available weapons in war. There often also seems to be a certain morality and value judgment connected to the use of certain weapons, at least if used in conflicts between people belonging to the same categories of belief system. To demonstrate this, Caillois, for example, mentions in 1139, the canons of the Lateran Council struck those men with anathema who used crossbows as long as they did not use them against disbelievers. Transgressions were not only punished by the church, but also by the state For example, with the cutting of thumbs of people using crossbows. I will come to my conclusion. My aim in this talk had been to reread Bellone ou La Pente de la Guerre in order to reconstruct the theoretical argument. Although Hans Joas suggested that Caillois' theory of violence has turned out to be obsolete due to the progress of ethnological research, my paper on the contrary tried to highlight two decisive points. At the first hand, I wanted to demonstrate that the fields of knowledge used by Caillois are not restricted to ethnological research, but also include history and sociology. In the context of this conference, it seemed fruitful to me to point out to the Chinese sources used by this author. Of course, this could only be done in a very superficial way, but the general question of the mentality of war in a genealogical perspective seems to be one of the most fruitful inspiration that this book provides. Beside the Assyrian and Mongolian empires, which Caillois only mentions briefly, the general question on a historical development of war could also be expanded to other fields like Egyptology. If the methods and methodology used by Caillois are sufficiently grounded is another question and may be complemented with available demographic data. In my opinion, one of the most important questions, which is implicitly raised in his research design, is what are the reasons for that a quite peaceful society transform its mentality into a warfare one? Under this perspective, I suppose that Caillois, as well as the other sociologists of violence I shortly mentioned in the beginning, are a precious contribution for research and what is generally termed othering. There would be much more to say about Caillois' theory, and surely there are shortcomings like the neglect of gender issues or the question about how religion legitimates war and peace. Nevertheless, the question it raises are far from obsolete. Is war the result of systemic social constraints where individual influence is negligible? Certainly, it is individuals who perceive, organize, and decide. But the consequences of their decisions are far from now on beyond the scale of the individual decision. Is this a relapse into a linear social evolutionism? He states the enormous complexity of modern society without complaining about the mechanization of society, because a machine is not bad per se. He calls for a sociological approach which does not neglect this sketchy form of totality, which makes inextricable the victory of the shady public good or the victory of an ideology and the interest of a minority, which are always near and according to a political staff or to the leaders of a faction. Thank you very much.